Okay.
Already recording to the cloud. All right. Well, as people start to trickle in, I just wanted to jump in really quick and say welcome, everyone. My name is Jamie Sunsbach. I'm the executive director at the Collider Foundation. And on behalf of our entire team, I want to welcome you to an event that we've put a little bit of time and energy into over the past years. We've worked with some great food businesses. So you want to start a food business. While our panel is getting ready and some of you are entering the room, I just wanted to jump in and let you know a bit about the work we do here at Collider. So Collider activates, connects, and empowers Rochester's entrepreneurs. We focus really on assisting entrepreneurs who are just getting started. So we call that idea stage, all the way to business formation and to the point where we call scale, where you're taking your business to the next level. And we really think that's a sweet spot and a spot that really that Collider can play a special role in here in the Rochester community. And over the next few years, we're going to see the creation of many businesses, not just in high tech and medical, which is what everyone knows Rochester for, but in many other areas. And one of the areas we've identified fairly quickly is food. And so I think that's what makes today so special is you get to experience it from the entrepreneurs that are living it right now. And thank you all for being here today. And I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to introduce our panel.
Thanks, Jamie. Actually, before we start, I wanted one of our team members, Julio, to share a little bit about what he does at Collider, especially with our Ecosystem Navigator program, because I think it could be of huge value to a lot of people here. So Julio, if you want to share a little bit about what you do, what the Navigator program is, and how people can connect, I would appreciate it.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. Good morning, everybody. My name is Julio Molina, and I am an Ecosystem Navigator with the team over at Collider. Last year, they received a grant to be able to have an Ecosystem Navigator program in place where we focus on helping minority entrepreneurs. My focus is the Latino community. So I help the Latino community find out why they're not starting their businesses or why they are not scaling their businesses. So my focus is that. Obviously, we have a ton of access to an unlimited amount of resources. So my job is to basically find a resource for that obstacle and help them start their business or help them scale their business. We're making great ground and glad to be part of this work and glad to be a part of this panel here today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Julio. So once we get started here, we can drop the link to our Ecosystem Navigator program in the chat. And that program serves female entrepreneurs, Latino entrepreneurs, and Black entrepreneurs here in Rochester. And Jamie and I also can assist through that program as well. All right, so we'll jump into our panel today. First of all, thanks so much, everyone, for being here. And thanks so much to our panelists for sharing their stories with us today. And we always think that the best way to learn is from entrepreneurs themselves. So I wanted to start out by having each of our panelists or groups here sharing a little bit of their story and talking a little bit about their business, just to introduce it to you in case you're not familiar with it. So maybe to start, I'll start with Sharon, if you want to share a little bit of your story and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Sharon Sue. The name of my business is Persimmon Bakeshop. And currently I bake pastries like croissants, and scones, and also sourdough bread. And I mainly sell online and via the farmer's market. I started out, I had to look this up actually, in 2011. I did my first events, and those were Art on the Ave, which is a great event that the Slatterly Neighborhood Association puts on. And I also did Thursdays on First that first year that they had it downtown. But back in 2011, Minnesota did have a pickle law, is kind of what it's commonly known as, where you could, people could bake from their home and sell at a community event. But in 2015, they passed a more comprehensive cottage food law, and that allowed bakers or pickle makers or jam makers, anyone making non-potentially hazardous food from home, to be able to sell directly to the consumer. So that's just a little bit about how I started out and what I do now.
Awesome. Maybe we'll jump over to Chandu and Andy with Infuzn Foods. Do you want to share a little bit about kind of your story and share a little bit about the business?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having us. We call ourselves the ABCs of Infuzn. So A is Andy, B is Bhaskar, and C is me. B couldn't be here this morning. We kind of started off with a passion for entrepreneurship and food. Each one of us had, varied backgrounds in this space. Some of us more comprehensive than the others. Today, Infuzn really is what we hope is Indian fusion. We are an Indian-inspired meal delivery service, which means that we curate meal solutions in about 17 communities for 17 communities in southeastern Minnesota. Our lines of business today are, hot meals, basically ready-to-eat meals. We have our line of specialty products like chutneys and simmering sauces and specialty beverages that have some retail presence. We have, we do catering for, corporate events and personal life events and things like that. As well as we recently launched a heat and eat line, which is, for busy folks on the go, refrigerated products that, can be used throughout the week. And in addition to that, much like Sharon shared, we have a presence in regional farmers markets and local pop-up events.
Thanks, Chandu. So our final panelist, Pasquale, can you share a little bit about your story and what you are doing here in the community?
Hi, good morning. My name is Pasquale Presa from Pasquale's Neighborhood Pizzeria. And we started this business in 2016. I actually, as an executive chef, graduated the Culinary Institute of America, came to Rochester, was recruited in Rochester to run the 4 downtown properties, realizing that there was a need of something authentic, unique to my culture, to what we do. And I always had an eye of how can I get into the community and showcase this. So I didn't start out on a little cottage license or stuff like that, because our business was obviously, you need volume for it in order to work, and you need major equipment, So when I left the Kaler hotels, I went down to the Dells at the Kalahari down there. And I just wasn't happy in the food service any longer, because it can eat you alive, and it's just such a cutthroat kind of business. When you expect people are part of your team, they're behind your back trying to figure out how they can beat you to it. So this is the reality of it, guys, whether we want to hear it or not. I got to tell you, I brought in 3 partners because I didn't have the money, I didn't have the funds. And I must say, it was probably one of the toughest relationships, and broke our friendship, because when it comes to money, money is greed, and people look at it totally different. And that was really disappointing to me when, you trust people. So last year, right, in March, as the pandemic hit us, I reached out to an SBA loan bank, and I bought out all my partners. And I felt that was probably the biggest weight lifted off my stomach, my gut, that now I could really be who I am and truly inspire myself to be the best, versus trying to please everyone else, So, we launched Pasquale's in 2016. I've also along the way have tried to help others as well. And you learn from those relationships. And I tell you, this whole pandemic has taught me so much about myself as a business person, as a community person, and me, personally me, how we could achieve, because everyone has a story, everyone has a journey. But I think when you reach deep inside and you want to do good and you do good, you get good. You know, that's just basic. Like there's no formula to that. And at the same time, there's also no formula, you know, I say for me to marketing. When you love what you do, it should be pretty simple to market who you are and what you're doing in your arena. And that's what I try to do all the time, you know? So I guess that's my little story.
Thanks, Pasquale. Maybe we'll go back to Chandu and Andy for this one. So a lot of what we hear at Collider through our Navigator program is questions about how to even get started. So can you talk about, you know, going back to the beginning, how were you thinking about space? How were you finding space? How did you figure out licensing regulations, et cetera? And what did you kind of use in the community to get you off the ground and kind of running?
I'll take this stab and Chandu can jump in. We are, if I look back 5 years, that's when we started around this time in 2016, where we are today, we didn't envision us to be here today. So we kind of came here by just trying different things. So to take back the memory lane, in 2016, we started with something very simple. We said we have a known commodity, a winner in Indian families. It's a staple food, just like Italian and sauce and pizza and cheese. Those goes hand in hand, olive oils and such. For Indian cooking, it's a cheese, paneer. It's common, it's ubiquitous, it's an ingredient. We said, hey, this is something we want to be selling, and we were very confident, I should say, at the time of the market, even though it's a smaller town, we have a sizable Indian population. We were very confident that we will carve out a significant segment of the cheese market. So we started with that. My background is in food science. I went to school for 6 years studying dairy technology. Then I went and did my PhD in food science and worked in the food industry for over 13 years. So I like Chef Pasquale, who is kind of a creator with this hands-on. My training has been to take something from bench top and all the way to the commercial shelf and everything that comes in between. How do I scale? How do I keep the integrity of the product and the intent of the creator to the shelf and consumer? So that's my training. So I had a heads up, if you will, a head start in starting the cheese product. And it went well, but didn't take off as we projected. So we said, what is missing? And of course, Chandu, with his marketing background, has all those critical questions. So it's truly three of our partners bring three different strengths to the table: my food background, my food experience, Chandu's marketing background, and Bhaskar, he's very operations oriented, computer oriented, and kind of a steady hand, if you will, in running the operation. So with three of us, we have three different outlook, but we complement each other extremely well. So what it taught us was to work out the kinks in the supply chain. So that was our aha moment. We said, okay, we mastered the supply chain. How do you get a perishable commodity like cheese, and how do you get it in the hands of the customer? So it was a learning experience. But we said, how do I grow this business beyond cheese? And so we said, how about adding other staple, non-perishable? Because that's one of the issues with cheese. And so we added a bunch of maybe 30 different SKUs to the mix. And that took us to the next level. But that wasn't all that we wanted to do. So we said, what else we can do? How do we increase the frequency of sales, and how do I increase the value or the dollar amount for each sale? And we found that there is a need for fresh vegetables, not the onions and tomatoes that was also available, but the exotic produce like jackfruit, like specialty greens that we would import from all over the world. So that taught us a few more things. So all of this happened in the first year and a half. But very quickly we realized that, okay, there is a potential. When I say Indian, they're not thinking of vegetables. They're not thinking of the lentils. They're not thinking of cheese. They want their hands on the product. So we happened to look around as to what we can do. we needed a commercial space. Like Sharon mentioned, there was this cottage license, but we right from get-go, we didn't want to start small. We wanted to think big and start small. So we said, let's not go to cottage license. It has its own limitations, like $50,000 cap per year and such. So we said we will exceed that very quickly. So we started looking for a commercial space, but we didn't want a restaurant because all three of us, partners and our spouses, we all work full time. So we have a day job, if you will. So one is our avocation, one is our passion. You decide which is which. So we wanted to make sure that if I run a restaurant, it's like Pasquale would say, it's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work. Things that go wrong every day. No 2 days are the same. So it would not lend some flexibility that we all have young children at different stages of life. So we decided not to open a restaurant, but we wanted to have a food manufacturing. So we looked for a facility that would meet our needs. So we cast the net wide and we went as far as Albert Lee and down to Fountain and up to West Concord and Cannon Falls and whatnot. And then we finally found a property that was meeting our budget needs and our needs. So we got a facility up in Pine Island, and then we engaged the health Department of Health, the Department of Agriculture early on, and we said, okay, here is what we are thinking. What are your suggestions? So that's one of the things I would say. Don't hesitate to ask for help. You don't have all the answers, so don't be afraid. Feel free to ask. But we asked the questions, and they told us what we should be doing. So we remodeled the facility to meet our needs, and lo and behold, we had a commercial kitchen, commercial facility that would double up as manufacturing facility for small operations. And then we had an opportunity to start small at the Rochester for Downtown Farmers Market. That has been huge. I think Sharon would also attest the clientele, the staff, the people who come to the market is truly our target population. So that gave us a foothold to showcase our product. We could sample, and like others would attest in food business, once you sample, the chances of people buying it is very high. So that led us to exploring other options. We were at the local breweries having pop-ups. We showed up at the events. So that led to marketing, and we found out that the people crave for ready-to-eat food. So we started a line of delivering hot meals to people on Tuesdays. That worked with our schedules. That's how we pick Tuesdays. And then so between farmers market and our Tuesday deliveries, people said, we want more of this. So, and then we pivoted a few times, and here we are, 2021, almost 5 years later, having about 70 different products, and we are constantly making and developing new product lines and trying different ways to make it work. And it's still an experiment in itself, but we have used this as an opportunity to understand the market psyche, to understand what the customer needs are, to understand the spice levels of the community, and so on. So it's been a fun 5 years for us. It's a lot of work, given that we all work full time, so it's like having 3 jobs in one. But I think with our backgrounds, with our experience, it's been a fun ride for the last 5 years.
Thanks, Andy. And for what you're doing in Infuzn Foods, you have, I'm assuming, a wholesale food manufacturing license through the Department of Agriculture, right? Do you have anything from
correct.
the Department of Health? Okay.
So right. So we do have 2 licenses, one for the light manufacturing from Department of Ag. So that we have a different licensing requirements. They have inspection. The Department of Agriculture inspectors come and inspect our facility. But then to sell at the farmers market, we have what we call the seasonal permit to have a mobile food stand. Ours is truly a tent. We don't have a food truck, but that's the license we have. So we have 2 licenses that we work with, one at the Department of Health, one at the state Department of Ag.
Thank you. Maybe we'll transition over to Sharon, because I think that was a good space to move over. So Sharon, can you talk about, when you were getting started, how did you think about licensing that you need, and think about where you're going to make your product and sell the product? How did that factor into getting your business off the ground?
Sure. So when I was starting out, I did a bunch of research in terms of what I needed for licensing. And like I mentioned, when I started out, there was a pickle bill. In 2015, when they passed the more comprehensive cottage food law, I immediately registered for that. And that's a fairly simple process. You just go to, it falls under the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So if you go to their website, they have an online form that you simply fill out. Currently, the law allows for 2 tiers of cottage food producers. Tier 1 is $5,000 gross sales a year or less. And then tier 2 is above $5,000 gross sales to $18,000 a year. And that's based on the previous year's sales. So people who fall into tier 1, well, anyone can sign up online, but tier 1 currently doesn't have any kind of fee associated with it. And tier 2, you pay $50 and take some more comprehensive training. But so that was a very easy way to get started. And in terms of producing things out of the home, I basically just use the equipment that every house already has in their kitchen. So oven, just sheet pans from your own kitchen. As I've scaled up, I've actually bought equipment to make my life easier. And in order to afford that, I generally look for used equipment, actually. So I got an old sheeter. This is a machine that kind of laminates pastry. I was able to find one on eBay. But there's actually an auction house in Spring Valley that auctions a lot of restaurant equipment. So I've gotten things from there too. A challenge with that is that you have to make sure that the electrical requirements will be okay for your home electrical, namely that it doesn't require 3-phase power, that it's single phase, that the amperage isn't going to exceed what your house can provide. It's interesting having some of this equipment in a home, but that's something that you have to look out for if you're scaling up. But basically, I've acquired some things here and there to just make my life easier. And it's funny because as you acquire certain equipment, like it eliminates one bottleneck, but then something else becomes the bottleneck. So you just kind of have to be careful when you're doing that to make sure that, I don't know, you kind of just remove one bottleneck and then another one gets introduced. So you just kind of have to think carefully whether or not the money investment is worth it. But yeah, basically, I should also mention that baking is not my full-time job. I'm a software engineer, and that's actually my day job. So on top of doing baking, I work as a software engineer during the week, normal kind of 9-to-5 type job. And then Fridays are usually a heavy prep day for me because Saturdays is when I do my baking.
Thanks for sharing that, because I feel like a lot of people think that they have to be like all in their business to consider themselves to be an entrepreneur, and it's not always true. And I think it's a smart thing to build things up on the side too, and see where it goes and not put so much pressure on yourself as an individual too.
Right. Being a cottage food producer really allows you a lot of flexibility in terms of how much time you want to devote to it. And also it gives you the freedom to really experiment with what you want to do. And it's not as catastrophic if things don't work out. Like, let's say you have a product and it doesn't sell really well. It kind of gives you that flexibility to experiment and play around. For example, when I started out, I was selling like completely different products than I am now. I was making chiffon cake, which a lot of people didn't know what that was. It's kind of an old-fashioned thing. But I was also selling like these tiny pies that I was calling kapies from the, anyways, I don't do any of that now, but through kind of experimentation, I learned what was right for me and eventually settled on what I'm doing now.
So for you, Pasquale, restaurant business is completely different from what Chandu and Andy are doing, what Sharon is doing. What were you thinking about? What organizations were you working with to start the restaurant? Do you have to have conversations with the city? Like, what did that look like in terms of licensing regulations and even getting funding? And you talked about your investors, but what did that beginning stage look like for you?
Yeah, so for me, luckily I came out of hotels, and the Culinary Institute of America kind of gave us a base of how to open up a restaurant, what expectations are. So for me, I knew that I needed to get in touch first with the health department. Before I even met with an architect, I don't know if you guys remember Adam Ferrari, he was in town. Before I even met with him, I wanted to know from the health department, what we needed to do. So that kind of gave me a baseline of next, how can we find a location? So first you just need to get to the governmental agencies. So you eliminate any possible, distractions or defaults, right? So then at least you can think clearly on what you need for your kitchen. And if you know that you want to open up, for example, for me, a pizza shop, I knew the layout was just going to be, ovens, basic sinks, a small dishwasher, a refrigeration, and a hood system. So like I don't have really that much of a complicated setup like a full-scale restaurant where once you produce more grease, you're going to need a bigger grease trap. So if you've been in the industry, you'll understand a little bit of those. But I did have a little bit of a pitfall. Like, for example, once we started designing the kitchen, and you create a menu. So you give it to your health department, they look at your menu and they're like, okay, you're going to need these type of requirements. I got the smallest grease trap because my menu doesn't have a lot of grease. The majority of my waste goes in the garbage, which is a paper plate. The production of our grease, the most that I produced was sausage being cooked and the residue on a sheet pan. So like they want to know how much grease will you be cooking and where is it going to be dumped and what are you going to do about that, right? So I do have an interesting story. My best friend, Michael Wojcik, that I had to bring into to a little bit of a rescue, but I also had to kind of put him in his place because he doesn't know food and he had no idea, was, they were trying to pilot this whole new water pollution. It was just so much stuff where they wanted to pilot a grease trap that needed to be above surface. Well, just think of this. Grease does not like go down, right? I'm sorry, grease floats. So they wanted me to put my grease trap on top. I'm sorry, they wanted me to put it on the bottom so I can get a machine to push it back up and go out. And it was just like basic rule of thumb, like you don't put grease down. You can't force grease to go down. Grease goes up, it floats. So we had a bunch of conversations and I had to get a couple of the city councils in here and also building and safety to say, I am not going to spend $25,000 on a machine that doesn't work. So I had to call other cities I worked in New York, especially. And I had a good friend of mine in the building and safety and health department that called these guys and said, what are you guys doing? Like, that's not correct. We don't do that. So thankfully, we didn't go down that route, but it would have cost me an additional $25,000, $30,000 for a pump that would break in a matter of a year or two that I wouldn't even be using because I don't produce a lot of grease. So you have to also know your business, like what are the pitfalls, what are the positives of it, because you got to lay it all out, or it's going to cost you a lot of money. And like Sharon was saying, on electricity wise, when you set up your restaurant, you need to know all the different powers. You know, you at the same time also, you know, fire suppression system. You have to understand a little bit of that, because, you know, when we created our restaurant, our hood system, I did not negotiate into our lease with the owner of the building that they would put the hood chassis all the way up to the, you know, the fifth story. So one of my partners that was supposed to be such a smart partner guy, he negotiated leases before. He never negotiated that. So I ended up eating $120,000 worth of an exhaust system going up. So, you know, when you're in the kitchen and you're working hard and you're like, well, how come now we have to pay for that? It was really disappointing to know that some people that talk really don't know how to produce. And it kind of taught me that lesson real fast, you know. So I had to start taking a lot of this in my consideration and be more confident, because I was just scared to talk about it. Like, I was scared to confront them because I felt, well, they're my investors. They put up money, you know. So you know, my biggest recommendation is, before you go into anything 100%, make sure you ask so many questions to the local agencies, which they're here. You know, building and safety is there. You can meet with them and kind of sketch out what you want to do. You know, they'll ask you questions. You go to, you know, health department, they'll ask you questions. You sketch out what you want. You have a basic menu. So then you have an idea what the expectations are needed for, you know.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'm going to go right back to Pasquale too for the next question about scaling. So over the past few months, you know, the holy grail of a lot of businesses, get into a grocery store. You made a frozen pizza line, which from what I understand is something you never thought you would do. So what did that look like? How did that change your operations? How do you start having a conversation with the restaurant? And what does that look like for your day-to-day operation? What do you have to be thinking about?
Well, I'll give you an example. I think that was kind of an exception for me and for everyone in this whole world, right? Like, you know, when you're in that position of like, wow, we have 5,000 square feet, 2,500 of it I'm not going to be using because we can't have indoor dining. You know, we have operating expenses that we have to pay. What do we do? You know, so the good thing is that, you know, we've created relationships with people in town. And, you know, when we were approached by Hy-Vee, as they're watching, you know, remember one thing, in business, people are watching everything you're doing. When you think they're not, they are. Even whatever you post, you got to be really careful. One, you could get in trouble if you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing. Two, you could also, you know, spark a great conversation with someone that is interested in what you are doing, right? So, you know, this conversation came about where, you know, a purchaser for Hy-Vee loved our product and, you know, approached me and said, hey, you know, we already are foreseeing we may have an issue with some of our supply chains. We'd love to help you at the same time help me. You know, would you be willing to do some frozen pizzas? I'm like, well, I'd love to, but I never thought, you know, in my mind that I would start doing this. Well, you know, we did the best we could in producing the product out of our kitchen. The same product I was trying to, you know, start in my little freezer as we were trying to introduce, you know, frozen lasagnas, manicotti, stuffed shells. Pizza was a little bit harder because I never felt that I should make fresh, then freeze it, the crust, then take it out, put sauce and cheese, and freeze it again. So as a culinarian, I felt like I was almost hurting my product because I never believed in like freezing 2-3 times a product. But that's what I needed to do in order to hold on to the shell versus everything falling off, you know? So we finally realized, you know, how to make our pizzas the right way and be able to sell. And then as we were selling these units, someone in the city, one of our competitors, was watching everything we were doing and made a complaint to the Department of Agriculture that we were selling our pizzas in Hy-Vee. So before you know it, I had the Department of Agriculture in my restaurant, sitting down, telling me, you're not supposed to be doing this. Even though we're in a pandemic, you need to follow regulations. And I was like, well, I have the same product that I'm selling here. I asked those questions to Hy-Vee, and Hy-Vee said that they would assume all the responsibilities. Well, they would assume the responsibilities of selling the product, but perhaps the communication wasn't there where I needed to say, hey, based on me reselling the product to a supermarket, I must have a certificate that, I'm selling meat products. Dairy I can sell, but meat, it's a whole different, arena. So we had to apply for the Department of Agricultural, certificate and license, which has stopped us from selling pepperoni and sausage products. And we expanded our vegetarian and dairy line until we got the approval to have an inspector here on Monday. Now my labor started going through the roof because now I had to bring in people on Monday to produce a pizza that was really only bringing me back 25% profit. So at the end of the day, I was like, wow, is this worth it? Is it not worth it? So at the same time, here I am, had to build a big refrigerator, big freezer, which is right next to me. That thing cost me about $30,000. Now I needed to have things, like frozen correctly. I needed to create labels. I needed to create our logo on there. So there was so much behind that. And, so the investment for me was good as I put it on paper, and I built out a pro forma on, wow, what could I do long term? Is it going to help me? Because volume is the cure to all sins, right? So if you do volume and you're able to bring in anything that's positive, whether it's 5%, 10%, 15%, and you're able to sell 100,000 units, then there's your profit, right? So that's what my biggest contribution was, is how can I understand this long term, not short term? So I took a chance, and now more and more we fostered the relationships. We did a lot of marketing. And again, I always go down to this, is people are watching you, right? Whatever you do, people are copying you. People are trying to be like you. And at the same time, everyone is out for their own interest, which is great. But you got to be careful, because any mistake you make, they just want to come after you like hyenas, and I noticed that. And that's very truthful, and business is cutthroat. And I got to tell you, that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned, is that I'm not that type. I don't like to, be cutthroat with people. I love to create a product. I love to be proud of the product. I love to showcase the product. I'm competitive with the food when it comes of it, but you also have to make sure that you're protecting your brand. You got to make sure that you're in legal, counsel all the time, to also, be careful that someone is not taking what you're doing. You got to make sure you have an IP attorney. You got to make sure, like, you have an insurance policy that covers your restaurant, and it doesn't just, allow anybody to sue you and take over your personal belongings. So all of this is all new. So it's great to start a little license out of your house, but if you get somebody sick, let me tell you, they're coming after you and everything you own. I can tell you that, because that's the reality of what we live in right these days. You're as good as how good you are, but when someone wants to come after you, they'll come after you for everything, and it's kind of sad.
Sharon, maybe we'll go over to you. So you talked about, you answered a question here in the chat about cottage food and the limitations with that, or the scope of cottage food. How are you thinking about, or what are you thinking about at this stage in your business in terms of growing and scaling? And what does that look like for you right now, and as you're thinking into the future?
Sure. Scaling. So this is an interesting question for me, because I've been thinking about it a lot. I guess I don't really have a lot of answers here. A lot of cottage food producers ask themselves, like, have I hit the max capacity that I can producing out of my home? Because generally, I think that once you feel like you've hit that, that's when you start thinking about moving past just being a cottage food producer. I am not quite sure that I have maxed out, though sometimes it does feel like I have. Because currently my work process is I do as much prep ahead of time that I can, but I generally bake the morning of market, or when I'm offering delivery or pickup, because I've done that during the pandemic. But so having all of the product ready, freshly baked on the same day, that currently basically requires me to stay up all night in order to do it. And that can get quite exhausting. But I also feel like it's okay to not scale up. Sometimes, like, I feel like if you like the way your work-life balance is now and you're happy where you are, you don't necessarily have to take that next step. So there are a lot of things to consider, I feel like. A lot of cottage food producers might not necessarily have the ambition to open a brick and mortar, and that's okay, whereas others do. So right now I'm kind of just pondering whether or not that's the right step for me. And right now I kind of don't know. I'm still kind of considering it. But anyhow, regarding commercial kitchen space, I know a lot of people would like to see this, basically a dedicated place that would just be for the community to be able to rent out. And I know that's kind of how I got connected with you. It's also how I've gotten connected with Jamie at Collider. And I was asking this question, actually, whether or not Rochester could support a place like this. I think it could. But that's a big undertaking to build out a kitchen specifically for the needs of, I mean, the people who want to use this, they'll have a variety of different products that they want to produce, and then I'm trying to meet the needs of everybody. I mean, I think it would be really great, but I'm not sure who would be willing to take that on. But there was a question in the chat about places that are willing to rent, and I know Pico Works and Pine Island is just got their kitchen approved. And I've asked around a lot in town, and it's interesting because there is unused kitchen space, but it's difficult to match what the kitchen owner is willing to give in terms of hours, and what they're willing to provide, and also match that to what people need. Sometimes it's difficult to just make that connection, which is why I'm not sure that it's really happened yet. So anyways, yeah. Really hope that it happens, but I don't know who would fund such a project. But I don't know. Hopefully someone will in the future. It'd be nice to have that extra stepping stone between cottage food and a brick and mortar.
If I can just add to that real quick, is Jamie had contacted or had put me, was it Jamie or was someone from Ready contacted me with a young lady from Orinoco that wanted to use or potentially use our kitchen to make ice cream. So this was about 3-4 weeks ago. And it makes it a little bit difficult because like we don't have necessarily the tools that this person would need. you know, and at the same time, she's going to need the Department of Ag to be here to watch her, you know, make the product, right? So I think it's hard. And like for us, we pay $34 a square foot. You know, I mean, I don't mind helping someone, you know, get started, but after a while, if it's going to be on a Monday when we're closed, expenses add up, you know, and it makes it really difficult, especially downtown prices. Commercial is so high down here that I think it would probably make sense if something like this were to happen to be a little bit out of downtown, because all you're becoming is essentially a commissary, right? For people to rent out, whether it's per month, per quarter, per, for 6 months. And the investment would be much cheaper outside the downtown high cost, products, you know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe I'll ask one final question to Andy and Chandu, and then kind of open it up for questions that have been popping up in the chat. With Infusion Foods, you went from the cheese to adding non-perishable items to produce. What was that journey like with the scaling? What conversations were you having with entities that were regulating that and funding that all? Have you been self-funded? Have you thought about outside investment? What does that look like?
Yeah, I can take a stab and Chandu jump in. For us, I think the two risks that Sharon and Pasquale talked about. One is the liability if something goes wrong. You meant well, but things could go wrong. Is huge. So we started with an LLC. We didn't want to take any chances with our own insurance issue. The second one is the space. Where do you scale? And that's why we ended up buying a place. Like Pasquale said, we don't want to be a commissary, and we are a vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free company. So it's hard to find a commercial space that would meet our strict dietary needs. I don't want to share an equipment that I have nothing against meat, so don't get me wrong. But to serve against our core audience and keep it vegan, keep it gluten-free, our facility is nut-free. Those all become a challenge if you are in a shared space. Not that it cannot be done, but the cleaning protocol is insane. Just like if you are into kosher, they have their own cleaning protocols and whatnot. So there are risks associated with it. So each of us should identify what we can live with and what we can. But our philosophy is very simple. We are very passionate about our food. We are very passionate about what we do. So we don't want just money. I mean, we could always go to an investor, but Pasquale realized that once they give you money, they control what you do. And that becomes tricky. I mean, unless there is a synergy in how we all think, and no two people think alike. So that's what most of our conversations is scaling. How do we scale? We see the potential, but we want to be able to grow in a controlled manner so it doesn't overtake us and we feel like we are not in control. So the biggest decision we are making at this time is how do we grow this company to the next level? I think we are pretty stretched, but we are not broken yet in how we are operating. But right now, our serious conversations with what COVID brought us, we created problems, but we found opportunities there too. So we have done well given the circumstances. How do we grow in a way that feels that we are continuing to control the supply chain, control the product quality, control the costs is our biggest challenge. And we need to grow, we need to hire. But that's where we are right now thinking, how do we make this sustainable, that it pays for itself, but at the same time, maintain our value, our vision, our focus on the quality and truly the product line. Chandu?
Yeah, I would just add, I think as a common theme to everything is growth is wonderful, but growth needs to be managed. And with growth comes growing pains as well, as Pasquale and everyone else is sharing here. So yeah, that's a constant area of introspection for all three of us, for our business as a whole. We consider ourselves very fortunate, with the pandemic. us operating, as, meal delivery, we had everything in place, to respond to that, right? And so that model of, direct to customer has been working out well for us. For us, the question is, how do you grow that? How do you nurture that? How do you sustain that moving forward?
Thank you. I'm going to try and get to as many questions in the chat as possible in the 9 minutes that we have left. And please continue to write them in there because I think some of them got answered as well. I'm also going to launch a poll here just to get your feedback and some information from you. We would really, really appreciate if you fill it out. As Julio was saying in the beginning, we do have a grant that supports us doing this type of work, and have to report back how it's going and how people are, what people are looking for in the community. So we would really, really greatly appreciate you completing the poll. So this first question in the chat, I think, is primarily for Pasquale. In the restaurant business, you have lower profit margins due to high food costs and high labor costs and other expenses. How's the pandemic changing the industry in this respect?
Well, I think ultimately you need to know your business inside out. It's kind of like what I said in the beginning, is for us to be able to make any profit, it's worth it, especially during the pandemic, right? And then when you understand how to scale and grow volume, then the volume is able to help reduce some of those expenses. And, you have to foster relationships with your vendors to always know when things are going to go up. What is the price of dairy going to be? I'll give you an example. When we started doing these pizzas, the government bought dairy because of all the schools being closed. We needed to make sure that every kid was able to have a lunch meal, right? Well, I never thought it was going to affect me with my mozzarella cheese. Well, sure enough, I usually pay anywhere between $2.50 to $3 a pound. My whole milk mozzarella went to $4.78 a pound. I had a choice. I could either change to cheaper cheese, or I could ask, I could tell the customers and put it on the menu, due to government regulations and cost of our foods, prices have increased. People want to know that you're transparent and you're telling them this stuff, especially if you have quality. So you've got to know every expense. You've got to have great relationships with your vendors, and you got to be on the phone working your business, because if you don't know your business inside out, no one's going to tell you your business.
So we have another question, if anyone wants to take a stab at it. There's an idea to develop a food hub building on 4th Street Southeast across from the Corncob Water Tower.
Yeah, I think this is an existing project. They might be referring to the workshop food hall. I know that they'll have 5 different spaces available. They're hoping for food concepts. So I didn't know if that was a question about that, or.
Kathy, do you just want to maybe explain a little bit if you're still here?
Hi, yeah, I've seen the transformation and rehab of the building, and I didn't really know what it was going to be used for. If it's something that we can send people to in order to expand their business, try something out. Do you get weekly rates, monthly rates? Or is it maybe private entrepreneurs that are just hoping to lease out some space? I didn't know if how it fit into the narrative today.
I think that'd be a question for the owner of the workshop food hall. Honestly, I think they were hoping for people that have just a food concept in mind already, and I assume that they would be charging rent monthly. But Jamie posted a link in the chat, and you can check it out and contact the owner.
We had a question about cottage food law, and I think we answered that. I guess one thing to add too is that you have to deliver directly to the customer, right, Sharon? You can't ship or
Right.
anything
Yeah,
like that.
you can't sell wholesale, and you can't ship via mail your product. Also, when I talk about time and temperature control, all of the foods that are listed as safe to sell, you'll have to look up the Minnesota Department of Agriculture site, but I believe the pH needs to be 4.6 or less. And then if it doesn't meet acidity requirements, then water activity has to be under a certain value. I believe that's like 0.85. So if you have a product that's like on the margin, which I know like say banana bread, things with high moisture content, you can get those tested at a food lab. And I know there are several around the Twin Cities that'll do that for you.
Awesome. I think if you have links to any of those, Sharon, that would be helpful to drop them
Oh,
in
yeah,
the chat.
sure.
We had the question, I think we answered about commercial kitchen space. That's been a revolving conversation, but if anybody has any other thoughts about where commercial kitchen space is, I'm sure that would be appreciated. Yeah, and I think that that showcases, yeah, the gap here. I would also say too, I did drop the Minnesota Department of Ag's website in the chat somewhere, and they have a really great food licensing wizard that's really helpful to go through to understand what you're making, where you should be selling it. So there's a question about when opening a restaurant in Rochester, where's kind of the first stop that you should go? What office or person do you need to go to make sure you're getting the right licenses and understand regulations properly?
I would say start with the Department of Health. Would be a good stopping point because there are a couple of regulations, mainly the food safety, but then they would also point the direction of from an environmental safety perspective, from codes perspective. But I would start with the Department of Health, and then additional, depending on what are additional things you're doing. Is it a cooked food? Is it ready to eat? Or is it just a produce? So there'll be a bunch of questions around food safety. My thoughts is start with Department of Health in Olmsted County.
Also, I would suggest is have a menu of what you want to do. So, you know, you're showcasing your talent, you're showcasing what your specialty is. So then you can talk to it. And when you're communicating with the health department, you're zeroing in on your box, what you're going to be the, you know, the champion at, right? Because otherwise they lose interest and they feel like you're all over the place. So you want to go in, zeroing in on what you want to display and what you want to do.
The other thing, if you're in the food space, is to take some classes on food safety, like certified food manager. That's a requirement. If you're opening a restaurant, one of you should be a certified food manager. So if you have no background, not that you're a bad cook or anything, but there are some key fundamental things that you should know, like what is the safe temperature to hold the product and how to cool the product, and what's the minimum heating temperatures and water activity, the pH, all these things come into play in food safety. So if you've never had any formal exposure, even though you are the best canner in the world, I would encourage you to take that course. It's not very expensive. For under $100, you can take a course and you can get a certificate as a certified food manager. That would also be equally important.
So we're at 10 o'clock, so it went very fast, as I knew it would. So thank you all for, first of all, thanks so much to our panelists for sharing their journey today and talking about some of these things that are on everybody's mind. At Collider, we're happy to help however we can as well. I'm sure these folks would be happy to answer your questions as well. But thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate you all being here, hopefully taking at least one thing away. And we will have this video posted on the Collider YouTube shortly, and I can send that link out to everybody who registered as well. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining today and spending a little bit of your morning with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.